When DevOps surfaced as a concept 11 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, the economy was struggling. AWS was a toddler. Servers lived in office closets, and deployments were a monthly or even quarterly Saturday exercise. DevOps was a novel concept focused on breaking down silos and reducing conflict between developers and operations engineers. It was relatively simple to talk about, straightforward, yet difficult sometimes to understand and certainly difficult to implement. A decade on, I find myself like a kid in the backseat of a long road trip asking, are we there yet? And even if we were, how would we know? I'm Emily Freeman. As Brian mentioned earlier, I'm the author of DevOps for Dummies, and I am obsessed with helping engineering organizations create company cultures in which diverse, collaborative teams can thrive. If you can't wait to the very end, which I highly recommend you do, you can snag the book on Amazon, and I would love to hear what you think about it. Change comes at you fast. It just does. Think about it. The speed of change for our tech is orders of magnitude bigger than the speed of evolution for our brains. Tech isn't the challenge. We are. And that's why DevOps excites me. Because despite what some vendors will tell you, DevOps isn't just about tooling. Although that plays a big component, DevOps really at the heart of it is about people. DevOps has transformed the way engineering teams collaborate to create and ship software. It's a broad and encompassing philosophy that inspires diverse implementations across the industry. Everyone has their sort of style or flavor. For me, I define DevOps as an engineering culture of collaboration, ownership, and learning with the purpose of accelerating the software development lifecycle from ideation to production. DevOps can enable you to reduce interpersonal friction, eliminate bottlenecks, improve collaboration, increase job satisfaction through engineer empowerment, actually trusting your team to do what they do best, and through that, accelerate team productivity. I don't have a DevOps prescription for you. I wish I could just give you a checklist at the end of which you would declare DevOps victory and be done. But unfortunately, no prescription exists. Because it's a philosophy, a sort of methodology, DevOps is something that prioritizes people over process and process over tooling. DevOps builds a culture of trust, collaboration, and perhaps most importantly, continuous improvement. As a culture, it views the development process in a holistic way, taking into account every single person and department involved. And that includes developers and testers, operations folks, security, infrastructure engineers, and so much more. This includes even business departments like sales and marketing, and certainly, customer services and how we kind of represent the accounts you work with. DevOps doesn't put any one of these groups above any of the others. It doesn't rank the importance of each person's work. Instead, it acknowledges that every single person provides value. A DevOps company treats the entire team of engineers and others as critical to ensuring that the customer has the best experience possible. DevOps evolved from Agile. In 2001, 20 years ago, I cannot believe that, 17 software engineers met and published the manifesto for Agile software development. This new workflow was a response to the frustration and inflexibility of teams working in a waterfall or linear process. Working within agile principles, engineers aren't required to adhere to original requirements or follow that linear development workflow in which each team hands off work to the next until it's finally done and released. Instead, they're capable of adapting, being agile, to the ever-changing needs of the business and the market, sometimes even changing technology and tools. There were 12 principles listed in the Agile Manifesto, and although it may seem lengthy, I'm going to list them out because I think it's really important to remember that the things we take for granted were once groundbreaking. And also just to remind us of all the little principles, because I think although a lot of us identify as agile companies and engineering organizations, we don't always follow it to a T. The first principle was to satisfy the customer by continuously delivering beneficial software. Accept and welcome changing requirements along the process. Deliver working software frequently. It got rid of that, quarterly, semi-annual, annual update with software. And instead, we're constantly releasing new features for our users. Enable developers and business stakeholders to work in daily cooperation. These people should not be strangers to each other. Trust your engineers to get the work done in the best way possible. Convey information face to face. I think this is especially important right now because although we cannot be in the same room with each other, we can certainly utilize video conferencing and be able to communicate in a much more nuanced and clear manner. Realize that working software is the most important measure of success and progress. Maintain a constant pace of work. I think it's easy sometimes, because of the words we use, to look at engineering as a sprint, when it's much more like a marathon. Strive for technical excellence. Simplify requirements and features. Instead of thinking about those big ideas, break those down into small components and user stories. Allow teams to self-organize for the best product possible. And finally, regularly reflect on how to become more effective and adjust behavior accordingly. Does anyone in this room feel like we're all nailing every single principle of Agile? Because I certainly don't. And I don't think that's necessarily something to be bummed about. If anything, I think it just shows how difficult the problems we're trying to solve are. They're big. Although Agile revolutionized software development in many ways, and I continue to be grateful for those ideas, it failed to address the natural conflict between developers and operations specialists. Developers being the people who write the code, develop the features, and operations folks being the folks who traditionally deploy and maintain that software. Silos still developed in an agile environment around technical skill sets and specialties, and developers still handed off code to operations engineers to deploy and maintain. In 2008, Andrew Clay Schaefer talked to Patrick Dubois at a conference about his frustrations at the constant conflict between developers and operations folks. Together, they decided to launch the first DevOps Days event in Belgium to create a better and more agile way of approaching software development. This evolution of Agile took hold, and DevOps has since enabled companies around the globe to produce better software faster and usually cheaper. DevOps isn't a fad. It's not something that's going away. It is a widely accepted engineering philosophy. A little over a year ago, DevOps Days celebrated 10 years in Ghent, Belgium. which makes DevOps 11 years old. I can't believe it. It's a tween. Although a decade on, and we're still on the journey. Most of us are at some phase of DevOps adoption. And whether you're a beginner or leading a team to high performance, I think there are a few key principles you can apply to every team. And these aren't just guesses. We have actual data to support our theories on the ability of DevOps to accelerate your team's velocity. Some of the only data we have on the efficacy of DevOps comes from the annual State of DevOps report. Nicole Forrestgren founded Dora, which was acquired by Google, and Nicole has since moved to be a VP of research at GitHub. I went back to the 2014 report to see some of those top predictors of high performance. This was the first report from the DevOps research. They found that a few key things contributed to high performing organizations. The first was a peer-reviewed change approval process. Other people look at code before it's actually released. Version control for all production artifacts. Cannot stress that is very important. Proactive monitoring. You're actually getting insight into how your production experience is performing. High trust organizational culture. This means that there's a psychological safety for people, that they feel safe to be honest about mistakes and to experiment without fear of failure. And a win-win relationship between devs and ops. 2014 also found high-performing organizations were deploying code 30 times more frequently. 30 times, I mean, that's significant. They also had 50% fewer failures than their lower performing counterparts. So let's fast forward to 2017, where the key findings were transformational leaders shape an organization's culture and practices. High-performing teams achieve both faster throughput and better stability. Automation is a boon to organizations. Loosely coupled architectures assist continuous delivery. That's when we're thinking about microservices. And lean product management drives higher organizational performance. In 2017, high-performing teams deployed on demand, had a lead time of less than an hour, recovered from failure in less than an hour, and had a low change failure rate, which is just a fancy way of saying their code stopped falling over every time it hit production. So that's the past. But what about now? Unfortunately, due to COVID, Google and Dora weren't able to release a 2020 State of DevOps report. Puppet did put together a report, which is available on their website. And despite it being a year older, I find the Google data still higher quality and the analysis to be more relevant to most organizations. The only major shifts I've seen in DevOps over the last year have been adopting a remote-first organization due to COVID. This has meant a much higher reliance on asynchronous communication, as well as video conferencing and chat tools. I've also seen a sort of instinctual pullback on some of the DevOps fundamentals, especially around small, frequent, incremental deployments and experimentation. Whenever people get stressed, they tend to take fewer risks. And if you haven't noticed, we're all a bit stressed. That said, the findings from 2019 are still extremely relevant and helpful, and it's why I've chosen to share them today. In 2019, elite performers deployed multiple times per day, had a short lead time, and were able to recover from failure in less than an hour. And that change failure rate, they had a 0 to 15%. If you're paying close attention, you'll notice that high performers in the previous years had a lead time of less than an hour. Meanwhile, elite performers have a lead time of less than 1 day. Lead time, if you're unfamiliar, is the time it takes from when a developer commits code to when that code is released to production. This is partially how Nicole and her team organized the data. They don't force each year's survey into specific predetermined groupings. Instead, they start each new year and group the data naturally, how it seems to come out through the survey. One of the theories about why lead time increased year over year is that this work is hard. And as complexities increase, companies react sometimes by adding additional processes as a way of feeling some level of control over those deployments and releases. So let's look at the latest findings from organizations who have already adopted DevOps and integrated its principles and practices. The first finding of the report states that industry continues to improve, particularly among elite performers. I get the most questions about this data in particular. Yes, elite performers grew from 7% in 2018 to 20% in 2019, which is awesome. But look at the high performers. Now, I'm not a math expert, but it looks like some high performers became elite performers, some stayed high performers, and some actually regressed to medium performers because this work isn't easy. Cultural changes take time, and sometimes they don't always stick. The real thing most folks want to know is if 43% of tech companies are high or elite performers, is it too late to get started? Am I behind? No way! It is definitely not too late. I actually heard this a lot when I took on DevOps for Dummies as a project. Well, why would you write that? They asked. Everyone already does DevOps. Duh. No. My experience in work interacting with companies and consulting on DevOps is most of us are still figuring it out. And while certain aspects of the philosophy apply to our company more easily, we all struggle with different areas of it. That's natural. Maybe you're a master in one area and still deeply struggling in another. Honestly, maybe you're struggling in every area. Wherever you are, I promise you are not alone, and it is never too late. But how do you actually improve? I think so much about DevOps is very sort of hand wavy. You see folks talk about how they reduce their change failure rate by adding tests to their continuous integration pipeline, or how devs and ops go on picnics every Friday because after one solid offsite, they suddenly trust each other. The truth is, there's no silver bullet. A DevOps transformation is a long road of hard work. Is it worth it? Yes. So how do we get there? Next, the State of DevOps report found that delivering software quickly, reliably, and safely is at the heart of technology transformation and organizational performance. DevOps is about delivery. How do we get software to our customers faster and more reliably without absolutely burning out and exhausting our engineers? Now you're probably thinking, well, CI/CD, continuous integration deployment, duh, pipelines are the answer. You're not wrong per se. Continuous integration and continuous delivery is a huge part of DevOps. It streamlines delivery by ensuring developers have the autonomy to deploy or release code. The benefits of CI/CD include thorough automated testing. Even the most simple implementation of CI/CD requires a robust test suite that can be run against code every single time a developer commits their changes to the main branch. Accelerated feedback loop. Developers receive immediate feedback with CI/CD. Those automated tests and event integrations will fail before new code is ever merged into the main branch. This means that developers can shorten the development cycle and deploy features faster. Decreased interpersonal conflict. Automating processes and reducing friction between teams encourages a more collaborative work environment in which developers do what they do best: engineer solutions. A reliable deployment process. Anyone who's rolled back a deployment on a Friday afternoon can tell you how important it is that releases go smoothly. Finally, continuous integration ensures that code is well tested and performs reliably in a production-like environment before it ever reaches the end user. You should think of implementing CI/CD as an iterative process. Every team can benefit from a version of CI/CD, but customizing the overall philosophy will depend heavily on your current tech stack, the languages, frameworks, tools, and technology you already use. as well as the culture you're in. If you're not there yet, to implement CI/CD, you have to write automated tests for every feature. This prevents bugs from being deployed to the production environment. Use a CI/CD tool or service. This is so much easier than trying to roll your own solution. Your pipeline will monitor the repository for changes and triggers those automated tests when new commits are pushed. Any CI server or tool should be able to run those tests quickly. Train your engineers. Update your developer habits, the sort of baseline of that behavior. Developers need to merge changes back into the main code base frequently. At a minimum, this merge should happen once a day. It's important that developers don't go off on a branch for weeks at a time and then attempt to merge it back in. Automated releases. A human still initiates those deployments, but the release should be a one-step process, a simple click of a button. Consider using feature flags. I love feature flags because they hide incomplete features from specific users, ensuring that your peers and customers only see the functionality you desire. I'm a big fan of Launch Darkly in this space and find that one of the best benefits is that sales and marketing folks can prepare for a launch and have the actual features already be ready in the code base, which means engineers aren't stressed about a particular deadline. Write documentation for new features. Automated releases should not outpace API documentation. This is especially important if you have external APIs. It is your responsibility to show users how to implement those APIs. Coordinate with other departments. Involve departments like marketing and customer success to ensure a smooth rollout process. In the third finding, the report suggests that the best strategies for scaling DevOps in organizations focus on structural solutions that build community. One of the greatest challenges for companies, specifically older and larger organizations, is identifying the true state of their culture. Even young companies can often overestimate the quality of their culture. And if you think you have a healthy one, I think that's a great start. But look at it with a cynic's eye. It's easy to see culture through rose-colored glasses. Ask your employees what they think. Be direct. A survey is perhaps the easiest way to evaluate the state of your company culture. You must ensure that the survey is anonymous so that employees feel free to be truly honest with you without a fear of retaliation or consequences. That's Archie, my dog. Include only important questions that reveal how your employees and colleagues actually feel. The best surveys ask questions about an employee's satisfaction and happiness. There are questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to leave for a 10% raise from another company? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your direct supervisor's job performance? That one always gets interesting and revealing answers. Observe interpersonal communication. You can learn a lot from simply watching how your team communicates with itself. Are colleagues spoken to with respect? Do people assume positive intent? Does everyone seem engaged in meetings? Pay close attention to disagreements. If employees are quick to generalize, name call, or escalate that conflict to anger, those behaviors hint at an inability for people to express their frustrations in a more professional way. Take a hard look at leadership. Company culture flows down from the top. The standards and priorities set by leadership have an enormous impact on the overall culture of the company. If your CEO behaves like a jerk, chances are you have a culture of fear on your hands. The fourth finding was that cloud continues to be a differentiator for especially elite performers and drives high performance across all companies. The cloud isn't some imperial plane where bits and bytes are transferred through the atmosphere. It's just another word for meaning, someone else's servers. Marrying the cloud with your DevOps practice can accelerate the work you've already accomplished. When used together, both DevOps and the cloud can drive your company's digital transformation. And I emphasize the priorities of DevOps: people, process, and technology in that order. The cloud, along with other tooling, falls squarely into the technical part of your DevOps implementation. Cloud computing enables automation for your developers and operations folks in a way that simply isn't possible when you manage your own physical infrastructure. Provisioning infrastructure through code in the cloud, which is a system referred to as infrastructure as code, or IAC, enables you to create templates and repeatable processes. When you track changes to your infrastructure code through source control, you permit your team to operate seamlessly and track those changes. IAC is a much more repeatable and automated, not to mention faster, than having engineers click around a portal, whatever your cloud provider. And the fifth finding, Dora found that productivity can drive improvements in work-life balance and reductions in burnout. Organizations can make smart investments to support it. Burnout is real, especially for those who serve in an on-call rotation, and especially over the last year. DevOps transformation is not an overnight process. After you begin applying DevOps principles, it will take weeks, if not months, before you see measurable progress. Just as you wouldn't expect to lose 15 pounds overnight, that would be more concerning than elating, you shouldn't expect to see massive changes in your organization that quickly. But after you hit a stride, you'll start to see consistent improvement. Many of the foundational principles of DevOps, trust, rapport, respect, those things take time to build. You can begin to influence this behavior through process, but a lot of it requires time and space for your employees to step away from their desks and actually get to know each other. Some of the topics they'll discuss will relate to work. Others won't at all, but I promise you all of it will be valuable. Think about having to receive bad news. Say that the project you've been working on for weeks needs to be scrapped, completely abandoned. How would the conversation go if your best friend told you? Now, what about when a stranger had that same conversation with you? Chances are the conversation with the former would be much more respectful and trusting than the latter. When you have rapport with someone, it is easier to not take things so personally and instead focus on the facts. You don't need to feel like you have to defend yourself because you know you're safe. Calling back to that psychological safety. Your friend knows you and loves you and accepts you. That's the mindset you want your engineers to have with each other. Of course, not everyone's going to love and adore each other. We're human. People are people, and some people just don't get along. You can, however, inspire mutual respect and understanding in any scenario. Finally, the last finding is that there's no right way to handle the change approval process. It leads to improvements in speed and stability and reductions in burnout. Traditional tech culture is known to be composed of engineers who are male, pale, and overworked, often in a hoodie. They might be a little curmudgeon-y too. The tech landscape, though, is changing. DevOps, I think, is leading the way toward a more balanced and diverse engineering culture. If you want to avoid some of the worst tech scandals in recent years and instead build a company known for its happy and productive employees, not to mention great software, you must demand diversity. Social diversity, differences in age, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, all that is vital to producing great products and ensuring a welcoming environment for everyone. Engineers who are passionate about DevOps appreciate and encourage social diversity, as well as a diversity of experience and skill sets and viewpoints, because all of these features increase innovative thinking and successful problem solving. Social diversity helps guarantee that your software is free or reduced of unconscious bias. This diversity is even more critical if you're a company working in machine learning or artificial intelligence or big data. Ensure that your employees go home at a reasonable hour. This is such a simple gesture and yet often overlooked. Please make sure that your employees aren't working more than 40 hours per week. Yes, your engineers know if the site goes down, they might not make it home for dinner. That is acceptable. Those situations, though, should be few and far between. Off-hours work, and certainly releases, are unnecessary now and a symptom of larger challenges within your organization. Engineering work is incredibly taxing. It drains your brain, and breaks throughout it are absolutely required to avoid burnout. This means restful weekends, evenings free of texts and Slack messages and emails, and laptop-free vacations. Seriously, I've threatened to shut down my employees' access, make them go on vacation. Provide great insurance and other benefits. Most of us are in the States, and you know how much medical insurance matters to your employees and their families. Many other benefits help your employees stay healthy and happy. Engineers are actually disproportionately affected by anxiety and depression. So provide opportunities for employees to improve their mental health. This is things like therapy and yoga, exercise, anything else you can think of or that they ask for. Give them time, and if you can manage it, money, to pursue activities that keep themselves healthy, both physically and mentally. Encourage alternative thought. Creating a diverse and inclusive environment to work in requires that all ideas and perspectives are welcome, not just those who come from executives. This diversity goes beyond what people look like and instead pulls from their experiences, stories, and perspectives. DevOps emphasizes creative problem solving, which means that you have to create space for people to share ideas, even if they're a little out of the box. In this way, I find that junior engineers are sometimes even more valuable to you than your senior engineers because they bring this raw, drastically different perspective, and they ask the questions that other people are afraid to. I think we've made extraordinary progress, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But I want to let you in on a little secret. I came to DevOps by accident, totally an accident. But I think my story speaks volumes about the power of the DevOps movement and community. I was a backend Java engineer at a small company with an extremely traditional engineering department. The team consisted of about a dozen engineers and 2 operations folks, which is, the usual ratio and abysmal. The code had a bug. I updated that code to select preview images in the application, but the changes weren't displaying and ops blamed me, of course. I looked into it and concluded it's actually a content delivery or network or CDN issue. And because of access restraints at that company, I couldn't mitigate the problem myself. I needed ops, yet the ops expert felt that this was a code issue and refused to help me. We went back and forth before I finally went into a break room and angrily typed a talk abstract. Humpty Dumpty, the story of DevOps gone wrong. In that company and so many others, the operations team was a bottleneck. They prevented me from doing my work, which was incredibly frustrating. It wasn't their fault though. The people involved highlighted the problem, but the problem itself was a process issue. In the course of learning about DevOps, I found incredible relief in the discovery that issues I had encountered, they weren't just about me. I wasn't a bad developer. I was just a human, and other engineers felt the same frustrations in their own jobs. We're getting there. The progress we've made is astounding. But where are we going? Have you all noticed some people seem to think DevOps is done? Dead even? I mean, look at these headlines. Now, I'm friends with James, and I got to tell you, that hurts. But in all seriousness, I think for a lot of industry leaders, they've been in this for a long time. And from their perspective, it does look done because they live on the bleeding edge. And often they work with new companies who have the privilege of working in greenfield databases and code bases and adopting the latest and greatest processes and tooling and languages and frameworks. It's much more challenging for those of us who work in large companies, often enterprises. These companies have decades of institutional knowledge, trauma even, and the slow process of change. I don't think DevOps is dead, but I do believe it's changing. evolving even. I mean, we're agile after all. If DevOps is dead, why are 56% of organizations still medium or low performers? Why are there 81 DevOps Days events worldwide every year across the globe, this year virtually, and still more next year, hopefully in person? I'll tell you from experience, every single one is different. But I do agree that DevOps can't stay the same because we're not the same. So what's next? Now, if I ever bill myself as a futurist, I'd hope that my good friends would stage an intervention because that's just silly. But I will make one prediction. After delivery comes reliability. I believe SRE, site reliability engineering, is the next step in our DevOps journey. Just like DevOps, SRE isn't exactly new, and it's very googly. But it's reaching an event horizon, a level of adoption that signifies its permanence in tech. I'll be shocked if SRE doesn't approach the popularity of DevOps engineer as a job title over the next few years, if not surpass it. The reliability of your system comes down to the availability of your software to users. This reliability includes the accuracy and integrity of data stored in your database, as well as what's visible to the user. If data becomes inaccurate or out of sync, the system is not reliable. If the system goes down, how easy is it to restore? What expectations of availability do your customers have? These expectations could be assumed or legally binding via a service level agreement, or SLA. Data inconsistency can become a problem if backup data is used to restore a system after an incident. This is actually the one that gives me nightmares. How do you ensure consistency in those situations? What are your redundancies? Here are some terms to keep in mind when planning and evaluating your software for reliability. Availability. This is the percentage of time your system is actually functioning and accessible to customers. And people have gotten used to extreme rates of availability. Latency. The time between when a user makes a request and your application actually responds. Throughput. How many transactions can your application handle per second? Fidelity. The level to which your application represents the actual state of an object. And durability. Your application's capability to meet the expectations of your customer over the long term. Whatever the future brings, one thing will never change. People will continue to be the primary priority of our work. That's our customers, our colleagues, and yes, you. Above all else, DevOps is a philosophy that focuses on engineers and how they can better work together to produce great software. Focus on your most important engineering asset, engineers. Happy engineers make great software. How do you make happy engineers? Well, you create a collaborative work environment in which mutual respect, shared knowledge, and acknowledgement of hard work can thrive. It doesn't matter if you call it DevOps or something else. The values of DevOps, encouraging teamwork, reducing silos, practicing systems thinking, embracing failure, communicating, accepting feedback freely, and automating processes, all that will live on. And you will lead the way. Whether DevOps lives on for another 10 years or not, you will, and I believe you are all that matters. Thank you so much. I'm excited to take your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah.
So we do have a question, and I'll just throw it out to everybody. Please, we have a couple last minutes, so please enter in any other questions into the chat. But we do have a question from Akshay. Hopefully I'm saying that, pronouncing that correctly. He says, these principles of taking care of employees is amazing in theory. Did you observe companies adopting it? Did you see companies that kind of took a U-turn in this segment and took employees and took treating employees well seriously?
I think it depends. And every company, I think, evaluates, what is the balance between retaining talent and, keeping either shareholders or investors happy. I think it is a mistake long-term to cut costs in this particular area. I have been impressed with companies, Google, PagerDuty come to mind, that have provided employees extra funding over this period of time to make their home offices a little bit more comfortable. This was especially important for people who did not have room or prepare to have a home office, you know. So I was very happy to see that, but still others have cut back. And I think you'll see over the next year, despite the market being more difficult to move between engineering jobs a little bit than it was in the previous years, you'll start to see the most talented engineers move to the companies that are investing in engineers, not just high wages, but again, like high insurance, you know, my ability to be free to take time off and not feel guilty or experiment at work, try new things. Like, can I take time at work to learn a new language? I think that is incredibly valuable, but it's really if the company values long-term investments or short-term wins. And if you're an engineer, I highly recommend you work for a company that values long-term investments.
Great, thank you. Okay, so another couple questions coming in, so thanks. So how would you, this is from Rob, how would you help ops people feel more comfortable and confident about moving to a platform that allows more automated deployment of software?
Yeah, I get this all the time, and I'm constantly on companies about only talking to developers. I think there's become this sort of, it's vogue right now to just, it's like we're going after the developers, and it leaves out a huge chunk of engineers who just don't identify as developers. Typically, operations engineers often started their career as either database administrators or systems administrators, and those people don't know JavaScript, or some of them know Ruby because of tools like Chef, but it's not people who were slinging code for a decade, and so they're less comfortable with tools like GitHub and source control. And when we only talk about developers, it can send the message that then operations engineers aren't necessary. This is especially true when people use the term no code or no ops. It drives me nuts. And so you're never going to replace your skill set in that you have a knowledge of how these systems work that engineers simply do not, the developers simply do not. These are front-end engineers, at every level of the stack, you're prioritizing different things. So a front-end JavaScript engineer is going to prioritize performance and going to sort of hide that latency using, tools that bring things up immediately or start to load the page as it comes in. Backend engineers are going to think about data. How do we make data reliable? How do we make it quick to move between the APIs? But your value add is just understanding that just because the servers aren't in your actual office now, the fundamentals aren't different. The servers just moved to big warehouses owned by Amazon and Microsoft and Google, and a few others. But they're just located somewhere else. So the principles still apply. I don't think you'll ever be replaced.
All right. So the next one is from Chris. Can you let us know of anything being done at a grassroots level to improve diversity in this space?
Yeah, so grassroots, that can mean a bunch of things. I will speak to conferences specifically around like DevOps Days events are amazing. SREcon, amazing. And I know the organizers of all those events prioritize the diversity of speakers, making sure that many groups are represented by the speakers at that conference, but also making sure that we're attracting people to the conferences who come from either underrepresented groups or people who just cannot afford to come to those events. I think, one of the benefits of this year it's really highlighted that not everyone can attend a conference because there is an extreme cost to that, not just the ticket price, which is smaller for a local or, more regional event. But if you have to fly or stay at a hotel, all of that adds up, food even. And so how do we make sure that people can access those groups of folks if they can't afford it? I'd also say that I've seen the tech community in general really start to make an emphasis on this. It's not perfect. People make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes all the time. But for me, improving diversity is really about Small steps taken every day, just making what you can make better, actually better. And start by listening. Like if you're not quite sure what to do, read books, about racism and misogyny and how it kind of infiltrates our industry and society at large. When you're curious and you want to learn about these things, you start to wake up to issues that you wouldn't have even been aware of. Same with me. So that's been my journey, and just kind of making sure that there's representation. And this is especially important in hiring. We tend to like people who are similar to us. Look at your group of friends. They're probably not that far off from who you are, the majority of them. And so making sure that you're actually checking yourself for your own biases, and making sure that your interviewing process is as equitable as possible.
Great. And then one last one from David. Could you share some thoughts or details about how we could use DevOps principles on the data in the data areas like data ops?
Data ops. To be honest, I haven't really dug into that group yet. I have a colleague that's really digging into ML ops, and I made him commit that we were going to learn together. But I think, the same sort of principles of reliability apply to data. And I think data is, I'm a backend engineer, so that's my sort of focus a lot of times. But when you're thinking about data, making sure that it's accurate and reliable and easily accessed, this is all incredibly important. And how you kind of structure all of that, you can do it in a lot of different ways, prioritizing a lot of different sort of concepts. So it's an area I need to dig into further. I'm very curious about it, but I think the same principles apply as far as team collaboration. Like you're not in your database alone. And so making sure that everyone has input and understanding around the sort of decisions you make from an architecture perspective is really important.
All right, so one got snuck in. So one last one. If you have a lot of manual test cases for your custom software, would you prioritize the progress of automating those tests versus making sure you have version control of your infrastructure?
Yeah, I would prioritize the tests over infrastructure, because the tests are going to prevent, hopefully, as you add the tests, they're going to prevent those incidents, which, the infrastructure being in source control is going to help at that stage. But thinking about trying to prevent those incidents, I think testing is much more important, though they're both a priority. I'd also say, don't stress too much about like going back and creating tests for things just yet. So get into the habit of writing tests as new features are developed, as bugs are fixed. For every bug you fix, write a test to make sure that that bug can't happen again. And then kind of look at, okay, what are the highest traffic areas of the site or application? Where are people hitting the most? And then what is most important to us? So it's like, your cart service, making sure that customers can actually seamlessly purchase things, or that you can actually get their money, I think is one of the areas you can focus on first. But don't worry about the thing that only 30 users hit in a month. Worry about the thing that 30,000 users hit in a month. That's sort of my approach to it.
Perfect. Emily, thank you so much. Any last minute comments before we close this down?
Just hang in there. This year is different and it's weird, and we're all just trying to figure it out. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves, and it's like, well, we're home, we're not socializing, we should walk out of this with a great body and the next great American novel. Like, no, you shouldn't. It's fine. Just be where you are, give yourself grace, and hopefully we'll all see each other soon.